I kept saying to myself, you're the one who wanted to do this, so you have to just keep going. And when things got tough, I would just, I follow one big thing, and I tell all my riders this: it doesn't matter if you feel bad. It doesn't matter if you don't understand where you are today. That's normal in the growing process. Just put one foot in front of the other and keep going.
There is a depth and a breadth to our lives that largely goes unexplored. As an equestrian life mindset coach and host of this podcast, I am here to lead you on that exploration. Deep conversations covering topics in and out of the show ring with industry leaders and unsung heroes alike, sharing their stories and what makes their journey unique, but relatable at the same time. We all have stories to share and lessons to trade, something we've learned from a horse or from each other. So relax and be ready to listen with more than just your ears. I'm Tracey Mitchell. Welcome to Hitting Your Stride. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hitting Your Stride. Before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to share some exciting news. This episode marks the first in a collaboration between Equestrian Elements Life Coaching and the Horse Media Group to present Hitting Your Stride to a new group of listeners. You can now find us on horsesport.com and horsecanada.com, in addition to the Equestrian Elements Life Coaching website and all of your favorite podcast platforms. We are very excited to embark on this incredible opportunity with Horse Media Group, so welcome to all of our new listeners. In today's episode, I have with me one of the most decorated equestrian athletes in our country's history. Christilot Boylen is a 6-time Olympian, a 3-time PanAm gold medalist, author, and winner of Equestrian Canada's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. Christilot has spent her entire life devoted to the sport and art of dressage. She was the co-founder of Cadora, one of the pillars of dressage development in Canada, and she has had an impact on so many people, from coaching Olympians and PanAm athletes to the average dressage rider throughout North America and the world who have a love and a passion for the sport. Most recently, Christilot became involved in Ontario Equestrian's GRIT program, Great Riders in Training, as a coach and a mentor for the young up-and-coming riders in the province. This interview is particularly special to me, as Christilot was one of my inspirations as a young rider. I had the opportunity to ride in a clinic with her when I was about 10 years old, and I remember so distinctly how she introduced me to leg yielding. As a 10-year-old, I thought I was just steps away from the Grand Prix ring after those lessons. I was so thrilled when she agreed to join me on this podcast. And needless to say, I had a huge smile on my face. For those who are listening to Hitting Your Stride for the first time, you'll find it's a blend of my work as a life coach for equestrians and also my 23 years as a registered equine massage therapist. I really hope you enjoy this episode, as Christilot has so much to offer. She shares some of her history, her training, her philosophies, and some really pertinent points on mindset and her thoughts on the sport. In short, she readily shares herself with us. So sit back and get ready to enjoy this episode of Hitting Your Stride. Hello, Christilot, and thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here.
This is a wonderful, this is a thrill for me having you here, and not only as a podcaster and as a professional in the equine industry, but also as the little girl growing up who followed your career, once having had the chance to be coached by you in a clinic, when I might add, I was way too young to appreciate in the moment who exactly was teaching me.
Well, I probably wasn't who I am now then, so everybody's even.
That is a very good point. That is for sure. So let's dive in. I am not sure if our listeners know, but you have quite a history of dance in your family, as your mother was a dance instructor and her school of dance in Toronto was very successful. You often performed in the shows she directed and choreographed. Tell me about your mother and how her exposing you to dance at such a young age influenced you, and how much of those lessons do you think shaped how you learned to work in partnership with horses?
I think the other things, aside from dancing, framed me and made me, gave me the basis I got from my mother were the things like having arrived in Canada out of the blue after World War II finished, 1951, and getting on a streetcar somewhere in Toronto and asking the streetcar driver where would be a good place to open a dance school. And he said, "Ma'am, we're coming to Bay and Bloor. This is a good area." So off she jumped. And as luck or the universe would have it, there was a house standing with a for rent sign on the corner, and she marched right in and got it. She didn't ask a lot of questions. It was too expensive for us at the time. I mean, I was only three years old, so it didn't matter to me what she was doing. But it was that spirit that pushed us through many difficult times as well as very successful times. And she was very good at what she had learned, her craft, which was dancing, gymnastic, teaching. And she was in a Toronto that was thriving and new. And she worked for people like Norm Jewison at CBC, who picked up on her talent and her ability to do short dances as lead-ins for things like that looked like the Johnny Carson show. And
Wow.
So that's my milieu or my background from that side. So what she taught me above all is do what you want to do and make sure you do it well.
Yeah. I know in reading your book, when you say, you know, she was with you or you guys experienced many tough times and also the great times. I mean, she made some pretty big trips to Germany and to Tokyo to support you in your journey as a young woman and young rider. So she was always there for you, was she?
She was. We had our, of course, we were both very strong characters, and there came a time when there was this, I made you, you better listen to me now. And I had made a pact with myself that I would follow. I was not in a position, as long as she was paying for my instruction and for everything I did have at least the decency to stick with everything she told me to do. But I knew I had made a pact with myself. When you turn 21, you're going to make some of your own decisions. And that's exactly what I did. When that happened, there were a few years that were rather tough on the relationship. That ended again the day I called her. Many years came between, and I called her and said, you know, I did get married in the meantime, and you're going to be a grandmother.
Aww.
And at that moment, she dropped it all.
Oh, wow. Yes.
But we've all, you know, these are, everybody has these stories to tell, and you just have to work your way through these situations.
Yeah, I love that. Now, did your experience in dance as such a young girl, do you feel like that translated somehow for you in the movement that you were
Definitely.
Yes, you were gifted with?
Well, I think I was born, thankfully, fairly athletic. My father was Australian. He was apparently very good at track and field and rowing and swimming and all that kind of stuff. The dance instruction gave me a wonderful sense of balance, my body, proprioception, as we state it now, and rhythm, above all, for music, for staying with the beat, for And all of those things nowadays with the freestyles and so on, I'm aghast at the number of very good riders who really have to go out there and learn how to dance before they can really ride a good freestyle, because they have no concept of going with the beat or against the beat, or we won't even talk about that in between syncopation of the
Right.
beat. They don't know those terms, but either do the judges.
Okay. Wow.
It's all
Awesome.
very simple, you know. Most judges really, they're very happy with 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That it could be and a 1 and a 2. That's the difference,
Okay.
and
So
it's not there.
yeah, it's
So
the
you know,
finer details.
yeah, that's syncopation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how many sides to the coin of your training are there? It seems you have learned from very distinct and very different people. General von Opplen was one. Herr
Yes.
von Neindorf was another. And
Yes.
they seemed like they had different, like seemed like different figures as part of your training in Germany. Well, you also have a blend of Major Anatoly Pirogordowski,
Yeah.
and your mother in your approach as well. Did they all have an equal share of influence in who you became as a rider, or was one of them more impactful than others?
I think so, but that's part of the growing process. I think my mother gave me that wonderful base. And like I say, that if you've learned to dance and you've been through dance school, you know that you know where your muscles are, you know when you're fatiguing, you know when you're out of rhythm. You're probably fitter than most people. So that's the base upon which I was able to draw when I took my riding lessons. And most of the riding instructors said to my mother, I wasn't around at these discussions, she's very quick to learn and so on. That's probably is the basis in the dance and everything like that. But I did not want to dance professionally, and that was one of probably the saddest things for her. But I must say, she never forced me that way. So when it became horses and riding, she was 100% behind that. Now, as to my my riding instructors, Anatol Pierre and Michael Gutowski, that was the other one in Canada that also had some influence on quite a number of the top equestrians that came through in 1970 and so on. Jimmy Elder still talks about Mike Gutowski as well as Pierre Grotsky. Pierre Grotsky was a 3-day specialist. So because I was in the Pony Club program until I was 14 anyway, he was teaching a little bit of all 3 disciplines. But he is also the man who went to my mother and said, look, she's very gifted at dressage, send her to Europe. And she said, can't I send her to someone here? He said, there's no one here. And there is where the crux of the matter is. She didn't say you got to get through high school, or yes, you have to get through high school, but I don't have to go to college. She let me follow that dream at an age when I could absorb probably far more than later. And that's probably was the turning point, because that's the only reason I got to an Olympics at the age of 17 was because she let me fully train from the time I was 14. Right. I had a tutor in Europe. Unbelievable nowadays when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, did your 2 German coaches, you know, reading your book, Canadian Entry, was awesome. It was an absolute joy. And, you know, it sounded like it was like you described with Herr von Neindorf, yeah. That you had there was a tormented happiness. So, you know, and then even later on in your years, you know, you shared that you had the General von Opplen in the back of your head talking to you and sharing experiences with Anatole, with other people. So, you know, what did those 2 individuals give to you that you know, you still have
they gave
today.
me that well, and it goes on from there. You have not even touched on Mr. Schultheis, Willy Schultheis, who was a legend in his time,
Yeah.
who I was with him for 8 years. And then comes George Teodorescu, who was Romanian, and he had a fascinating life story. I'm coming back to him because he probably had the biggest influence on me because of that varied background. But the Germans, particularly Mr. von Neindorf and von Oppeln-Bronikowski, made a huge impression on me for two simple reasons. They were the first that introduced me to the full German system. And don't forget that with von Oppeln, I did not speak English and he did not speak German. I'm sorry, I did not speak German, he did not speak English. So of course the lessons were extraordinarily difficult. And yet, you know, I kept saying to myself, you're the one who wanted to do this, so you have to just keep going. And when things got tough, I would just, I follow one big thing, and I tell all my riders this: it doesn't matter if you feel bad. It doesn't matter if you don't understand where you are today. That's normal in the growing process. Just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. There will come a light somewhere down the road. And too many parents and kids right now, it's, but I don't see it, but I don't feel it. Well, of course you don't. You're not that far along. You know what I mean? You have to trust that the system is going to move you through those pockets, you know?
Yeah. So how did
But
these?
I didn't have a choice. So I was in a very good shape. You see, I didn't have a choice. I was dumped off in Europe. My parents put me in a home, a family. They found them through the church. And I was immersed in German and in the culture and everything else. And it wasn't all, I didn't think, I thought, oh my God, this is just the pits. And I don't like this food. And I do like this food, the whole thing. But I came out the other end a far better person, as well as had all the basics of the German system, which was awesome.
Wow. So it's kind of like when your back was up against the wall, I mean, yeah, you had no choice. You were going to be successful and you wanted to do this.
Particularly since I was the one who said I wanted to do it.
Yeah. So who was the coach you wanted to get back to and share a story with?
All right. So Mr. Schultheis was the next one that had a huge influence on me. And I mean, I did know he was one of the stellar lights he is still looked up to today as one of the legends of the German dressage world. And he was, he had the German system, but he had his own little kick on it as well. He was extremely gifted. So I was with him for 8 years. And that's another point I want to point out, is that I often see ads and I see people who say, oh, I've trained with Christilot, or I've trained with so-and-so, and I've trained with whatever. And I realized I had them in a clinic once, maybe twice.
Yes.
And that is unfortunate. I think if you want to say you've trained with somebody, you have to have gotten over the 3-year mark.
Okay.
And I was with Schultheis, meaning not day and night and not year in, year out, but he came to Canada. I had horses with him in Germany. He picked shows. He took me to the Olympics in Munich. So it was a full-time relationship of that type. And it was 8 years in total.
Wow.
And the next one I went to because Mr. Schultheis got hired by the German Equestrian Federation to be the head coach for their Olympic squads. And at that point, he was not allowed. The rules did not allow him to teach anybody from any other country. So I had to find the next one. And because I'd already been showing a lot in Europe, and so I'd been watching all those professionals and all the top trainers. And I decided the one that I would like to go to would be George Teodorescu. He was an interesting man. He was Romanian by birth. He defected to Germany at the Aachen Horse Show and had to go and hide in the Romanian embassy first, because that was all communistic at that time. I find it incredible. Here we are back in talking about this kind of stuff now with the whole Ukraine thing. But he had to escape from Romania, which was under the control of the communists. And he jumped ship at the Aachen Horse Show. They had him there officially riding for Romania. He then, in the next few years, married a German lady who was no slouch as a rider herself. She was the ex-wife of Hans-Günter Winkler, the jump rider. And she was an extremely good partner for him on the riding side, but also in running the barn in Germany and everything else. I trained with him for just over 8 years. Again, the same thing. I brought him to Canada. If you go back and look, he was the coach for the 1976 Olympics. I kind of always went with these people and then asked them if they would help me. And if other Canadians wanted help, I would run a clinic or something like that and add them to it.
Right. Yeah, just getting those people some European experience.
Well, that's it. But they also have to have a reason to come over. If they have a student that they have been working with, it's much easier for them to kind of make the jump into deep water. If you called up somebody you don't know at all and said, well, would you come to Massachusetts and do a clinic for 3 days, but they don't know any of the riders, they don't know the farm or anything else, it's tough. Because they don't have any orientation, you see?
Yeah. Yeah. So out of all of your coaches, who was the one that left you with the most that you now share with your students?
I think it's an absolute mix of everything I've gone through, because don't forget, also over this whole period of time, there are even others. I haven't named them all even. My partner for years in Germany, that we ran a stable and everything together I was in Germany for 23 years, above and beyond the Olympic experiences. I learned from everybody I ever saw riding. And I think when it starts to build up, what I can give to most people is a huge background in different horses also. I never only rode, there are certain names come to mind. Nicole Uphoff from Germany, who won, I don't know, millions of gold medals. But if you look seriously into her career, it was on one horse or two horses. Isabel is the big exception. Isabel has produced horse after horse after horse, Isabel Verd. What's the name of the really good one who had the Verdatis horse in the United States? One horse. Did fantastic work with him. Rode Laura Graves. We're still waiting for the second or the third horse, if there is one. I'm not saying it's wrong that she hasn't brought anything out. Maybe she doesn't want to. Maybe that was her one-shot horse, you know?
Yeah.
But I was a professional. That's how I made my living. That's what I wanted to do, was produce horses and riders and show. And now that my career in the show ring is winding down, I'm left with still producing horses and riders and being able to help maybe most in the fact that I've worked with very hot ones. very lazy ones, nasty ones, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you know, I have a wealth of experience to fall back on.
Yeah. And I don't know, the way I was brought up too is, you know, there's always something to be learned in every situation.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think the fact that you've had such a long and distinguished, you know, list of coaches, the fact that you fully say, I got a lot from everything. I think that's awesome.
Oh, and you know what? I think that's a characteristic of all the top riders. When through the GRIT program and Ontario Equestrian, I started to work more closely with Ian Millar. I'd known Ian for years. We usually met regularly at the Olympic Games. But he will say the same thing. He said, what influenced him the most? He said, hanging over a fence and stealing with my eyes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And there you are, watching.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
That's awesome. I love that. So in your book, Canadian Entry, you write about watching your 1964 Olympic horse, Bonheur, running in a field. And this is at this time you were with Major Anatole. And
Yep.
At that moment, this is what you said. At that moment, I felt that I had learned a new truth, that I had witnessed an approach to life to be emulated. Living joyous and free of tension is the lesson to be learned from a spirited horse. You wrote those words in 1966. How has that lesson held up in almost 60 years since then? And do you apply that lesson equally both in and out of the ring?
The horse has to give you what you would like him to do. He is not under an obligation to do so. And that is that freedom and that joy which you have to try and incorporate into your work with the animal. It's the same with dogs. You don't want a cowed dog that sits there with his ears down because he doesn't understand discipline properly. And horses are a different matter. They're big. They have their inherent, they are flight animals, inherently flight animals. And that is something every rider deals with every day. But you don't beat it out of them. You can't anyway. You will just make a total mess of everything if you even try. But you have your tools that you've been taught if you go by the classic system, how to balance them, how to help them, how to be consistent day by day. That's what teaches horses the most. You can't ride on Monday and then disappear till Thursday and say, oh, well, I'll pick up where I left off on Monday. You won't. You'll be somewhere back even further, maybe. But horses have to, I think respect is a big word. Horses have to respect their riders, but by God, we have to respect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes that is not carried forward. When riders get out of hand, normally it's because they're saying, oh, you're so stupid. I've shown you this thing 10 times and now you still won't go buy it.
Yeah.
That is, I'll tell you who's stupid in that particular case, and it's not the horse, because that's his inherent mechanism. That's what we've just decided on. We know that. They've been taught, they've survived for centuries because they have that innate ability to notice the slightest differences in their surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take it out of them? No way.
Yeah.
They have to have trust. So all those things hang together along with, that's a feel that you get for horses. And a good rider, a good trainer feels something ready to happen just before it happens.
Mm-hmm.
An inexperienced rider or a flat bad rider is always late. They reap the consequence because they're late. They can't fix it. And so that's a problem in the training process. And that's why trained riders need to develop younger horses, particularly over the barrier issues. And green riders should be on horses that have some experience, because that's what they're going to learn from.
Yeah. 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 I guess the free of tension is what really resonates with me out of that quote.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
just day to day in your schooling. I mean, even when we're not on horses, I would think as riders, you know, practicing that mindset, and perhaps, you know, working on our own bodies separately from the horses. What do you think of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anything like that. And be, you know, you have to remain as a person separate from your riding, spontaneous and able to look up and say, wasn't that just plain beautiful? And in so many ways, that's what dressage, we see it in all the books. It's supposed to make the horse more beautiful. It's supposed to make the horse more balanced, et cetera, et cetera. There's something gone terribly wrong when the Grand Prix horse is cramped and looking worse than the young one running loose. Yeah. They all have to have their free time, etc. And yet, on the other hand, I'm not an advocate of no discipline. That doesn't work either. Okay. So it's so important to find a nice balance between all these things. But I find that the best riders that I know were all, going back to George Teodorescu, he also taught me a lot about red wine.
But what?
Red wine.
Red wine.
I didn't know a vintage wine from anything else.
Okay.
But he had been a lawyer before he escaped to Germany. He was a connoisseur on all fronts. And I think he radiated that joy. I will never forget him cantering around, coming into the arena one morning, and he's galloping, beautiful, collected canter uphill, laughing away because his greyhound is bounding around the bottom of the horse. And I'm thinking to myself, there'd be a lot of people saying, "Oh, that's a no-no. That horse, that dog should not be running in the arena."
Right.
With that horse. Okay, different times it was his arena. Why shouldn't he? But he just had simply, the joy just poured out of him, and the horse was very happy and the dog was thrilled. So what can
you learned about wine. So
and I learned about wine too. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes, he would make us sit down for evening dinner. And I mean, dinner, you did not stick with just riding, and he would explain in detail what you were eating and explain in detail what you were drinking. And yeah, he educated on a lot of fronts. Yeah.
Well, I think that is very inspiring in the sense that, you know, what I'm trying to do with this podcast is kind of open up riders' ideas about, you know, like the riding community, but also like looking outside of their riding lives and what they do out there that they then bring in. And, you know, is it, what are they bringing in? Is it necessary? Is it messing with their relationship with the horse? Is there something else they need to do for themselves, personal development, that would make them better as a rider? Like there's so many aspects. So I love that. It's almost like describing, like, you know, you can be so immersed in the sport, but working on yourself as a complete and whole person.
Right. And I mean, this was my preference to develop in those areas. I found great interest in what he was telling me. I would then go to a museum because he said to me, "This is what you got to look at," or this or that. So there was all kinds of education, but it has to be something that inspires you personally, because otherwise you won't stick with it, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
But I think more people should get out of their little boxes, you know?
Yes. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, Christilot, your list of personal accomplishments is as distinguished as it is long, from making the Olympics at just 17 years old to being a 3-time Pan Am Games gold medalist. Is there something that really stands out to you on this list, or was there something else that you've achieved that is your proudest moment?
Those were just competitions, basically, and I'm glad I did well at them. The toughest Olympics for me was 1976, and it turned out to have one of my best Grand Prix results was 6th at that games, because it was the most difficult one. The horse had been hurt, had a check ligament problem 6 months before the Olympics, had qualified, but I really couldn't train the way I wanted to train. And that was the first time that I felt the need to really get into psychological help and sport psychology. It was an Olympic Games in Montreal. The press was a little crazy already beforehand. I was touted because of the Pan Am medals. Had no bearing on Olympics, but they didn't know that. And so there was a lot of pressure for me going into that. And the worst part was, and the coach was George Teodorescu.
Okay.
And leading into it, he said, there's a lot of things we haven't been able to do going into this games, but keep your mouth shut. Don't you go whining to the press or anything about the fact, now get this, that you have never ridden this horse outdoors.
Wow.
That was the secret. He was qualified at an indoor event, and we trained to the Olympics. And when I got to Bromont, we were still riding lightly and leaving out the extensions and stuff like that. And I was able to ride outside on the ring then, but I had not ridden him in a 20x60 competition outdoors. And I said to him, but I can't take that pressure. Nobody, maybe they would understand if things go wrong. He said, it's nobody's business. It won't help anything. Just do what you can and do it. And you know what? And then I spoke to a really good sports psychologist. His name was Dr. Minden, and he worked at York University. And he basically gave me all the normal routes, the relaxation where they go around your whole body and say, can you feel your right toe relax? Can you go up your right arm? Can you lift your arms and let them dangle down with no tension? So he worked me through all of those things. And then he said, you know what? Let's talk about the Olympics. What would happen? What's the worst scenario? I said, the worst scenario is that this horse goes in, has a nervous breakdown, won't go in down the center line, or just loses it at the Olympics. And he said, yeah, are you going to ride out of the ring then? I said, yeah, I guess I would. You going to go to the barn and unsaddle? I said, yeah. He said, are you going to have breakfast the following morning? I said, yeah. He said, then get over it.
Wow.
It's a moment in time. It is not your whole life. You're telling me if you told me you're going to slit your throat and your wrists, I might be worried now, he said, but you're not going to do that. No matter what happens. It's just your hope and your pride and your high hopes and your not wanting to let anybody down that is causing you all this tension. So get over it. And he said, I'm giving you the tools to get over it, which was all the relaxation. And you know what? I had the most amazing, for many, it was just another Grand Prix. But I know when I started down that center line, I was, as they describe it, in the zone. Everything was like being in slow motion. Nothing was rushed. I could feel myself shortening my inside rein by an inch here and doing that. It was like everything was in a dream phase. And of course, he came out 6th in the Grand Prix.
Wow.
Which put him into the finals. And for me, that was a mind-blowing experience, because it had that flow that everybody talks about wanting to get, and it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen every month. You have to work extraordinarily hard to reach that, to have that degree of tuning everything else out.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that was big experience for me.
My goodness.
And then in Germany, I won the Hamburg Derby, which doesn't mean anything to North Americans, because at that time they didn't even, EC didn't even bother to report on it, because they didn't understand the importance of the Derby. But I did manage to win the Derby, which is changing horses.
Right.
The top three change horses, and you switch riders on. So the top three horses and the top three riders go in.
Wow.
And it's a real test of horsemanship. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was very proud of that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, your story about the riding in that ring, that gave me goosebumps. That would, that's amazing. Whew. So in your opinion, where is the level of equestrian sports in Canada when compared to the rest of the world? Are we close to reaching that elite level? If not, what do we have to do differently to take that?
What elite level are you talking about? Explain what elite level you want to,
any top, getting close to the top of dressage internationally.
I think we have a ways to go yet.
Okay.
No, as a country, it was always an educating matter here, because we were not steeped in the background. This was the wonderful part about my German training, because that is the #1 country in the world for dressage. And my mother very logically said, I guess I'm going to send you to Germany. She was being told to send me to France. And at that time, there were actual discussions about the French method as opposed to the German method. And then later on, it became, go to Holland instead of Germany. Well, that's proven itself to be not quite the case either. I think they all have good riders, and they all breed good horses, but the Germans have a classic system that is undeniably also in the setup of their shows and their competition and their development of the whole sport, probably the best in the world. So I've been able to pick and try to incorporate some of those things whenever I was asked to either improve on the tests early on 30, 40 years ago, before I went on my 23-year journey to Germany. And since coming back, getting more involved with programs like Ontario Equestrian with the GRID program, and also EC with the coaching program now, and anywhere in all kinds of those kind of committees and setups where they need an experienced eye or person that can at least tell them correctly what the Europeans would be doing in that situation. We need to build from the ground roots up. I'm very disturbed that the shows, maybe due to COVID, maybe for many reasons, are running by a very thin thread. There's always this one judge in the ring in many of the classes. The same class runs with amateur division, with the open division and everything. It's all mixed up. There's never anywhere for anyone to sit and watch, or very seldom. There's no really nice ambience in terms of a place to have a nice drink. I don't mean alcoholic, anything a little nicer, rather than just a coffee and a donut type of thing. In other words, the whole picture of the shows has got to get back. That's why everybody likes to go to Florida now, because they offer all those things, but at an incredible price. And yes, they are already at the elite level, basically, but they have lots of national shows as well. And we have to upgrade our national levels and make people aware of how to develop a young horse. Where do they have to show? What levels should they be at by the time they're 6, by the time they're 8, by the time they're 10?
Okay.
Right now, it's kind of a hodgepodge.
Well, you were the first, if I'm not correct, you were the first real example of a Canadian kid going over to Europe and getting the training. Do you see any of that happening? Is there any way that Canada can, get over to Europe for more experience in some shows?
I don't think they need to anymore. There's so many Europeans over here. And yes, if somebody wants to go to Europe and train, by all means, go. But there again, a lot of people don't do their homework, and they do end up, I know of cases where young riders, young Canadians have gone over, they ended up only mucking out and only doing this and being used and coming back with rather a jaded opinion of the whole thing. You cannot say that all of Europe is perfect and every barn you go to, you're going to learn from. You have to be in the right place, preferably at the right time in your development, and be in a stable, that's why Van Nijnder, for example, was perfect for me at early on in my career, because he was one of the only places who had really schooled school horses.
Okay.
But if you end up in somebody's private barn, you are, if they only have 1 or 2 top Grand Prix horses, they're sure not going to put their student on them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other good thing that happened to me was that I took Bonheur with me. That was a novelty. A lot of people like to go to Europe, but they don't take a horse for obvious reasons. But you learn from your own horse and from his journey. So I'm not sure my mother certainly didn't have the background to do those things correctly because she knew so much. We were very fortunate, but she ended up doing exactly what was necessary to move my career forward.
Okay. So may I ask then a little bit about your involvement in Ontario Equestrian? Back last year, I did interview 2 of the GRIT program members, Anna Swackhammer and Carson Lewis. And how much fun are you having coaching the next generation of riders in this GRIT program?
It's a lovely beginning. It was meant to try and open up the possibilities for more Ontario riders in all 3 disciplines. And here comes a little bit more of the classic European touch. Dressage is not isolated from the jumping, because in Europe and everywhere now, look at the top riders, and Ian stands right beside me and says, gymnastic, 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 everyday gymnastics. You might jump once a week, or you might jump twice a week, but not courses and big jumps. You're refining your technique. And if you can't stop and turn and keep your horse in control, how are you going to do it at a dead gallop or anywhere else around the course? So already the concept that dressage isn't just for the dressage ring, but is the basis, is huge, because there's still a great segment of people in Canada who don't believe that.
Yeah.
Now, that's number 1. Number 2, the GRIT program involves all 3 disciplines. It's quite obvious that 3-day horses have to be able to do at least their level of dressage. That's their day 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have every reason to want to learn how to do a better dressage test at a basic level. And again, the same reasons. It's going to make them better when they get to their cross country, because their horse, through proper dressage training, is supposed to become more balanced, more able for them to control. If you can control your horse, you can control the speed, you can make tighter turns, etc., etc. So that concept, all those kids working together, whether they're jumpers, 3-day, or dressage, has been fascinating. Because they have normally seen hunters and jumpers, they go to their show. Dressage is always isolated by itself. In the 3-day, we never see them unless you want to go and watch a 3-day event. So for these kids, it's the first time they're actually confronted with what else goes on. I'm waiting for the day that somebody says to me, one of those kids says, hey, I'm in the jump program, but I really would like to try the dressage.
Yeah.
It's going to happen sooner or later, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So,
sorry.
and I can't say enough how wonderful it has been to work with Ian, because two of us that have had this great experience of Olympic Games and everything else, and reinforcing this idea of flat work and everything. And Ian comes out of every clinic saying, I learned a lot. I find that totally wonderful.
Yes. Yeah, no, the whole talking to Anna and Carson, they have, I mean, Anna is a dressage rider, so she was completely, thrilled and excited to be working with you. And Carson, being a jumper, he was like, I am totally open to it, and I love the fact that, yeah, it broadens their knowledge base and, helps them develop the more full picture of their basics and their riding. And as a massage therapist working on these horses, I can really tell who has those foundations and who doesn't.
I betcha. And
Yeah.
that would be a topic. We'll have to get you to come into one of the grit sessions at some point, because that would be fascinating to go over
awesome.
too. But that's something the Germans and the Europeans, they'll a good dressage coach can look at the horse's neck and tell you what the horse's problems are before you've ever put a leg over him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, it's fascinating.
I know. I can talk, horse body movement all day long. But the other thing that I get into a lot in the life coaching that I'm doing is mindset. So mindset can be the difference maker in any sport, and especially in equestrian sports. How have you approached that aspect over your career, from the harsh realities of German training to dealing with competing while fighting breast cancer? What was it about your mental approach that allowed you to be at that elite level for so many years?
I think if I think about it, my one thing I can do is shut other things out. I simply ignore what is not conducive to the result I want to achieve. And with the breast cancer, I really, it's a terrible analogy. It's a terrible thing. No, I better not even say that. I was going to say giving birth was one of the other horrible experiences. But it isn't, because you can't even remember it. Most women say that after you only remember how lovely it is to have the baby, and it suddenly falls away, the hours, or in some cases days, that were not so nice leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can say the same for the breast cancer. I got very good about it though, because as long as the treatments were going on, the chemotherapy, I had it down pat. Day one was no problem. It hadn't hit you yet. Day two was okay. Then they gave you dexamethasone. Day 2 and 3 were actually better than ever because you were high.
Okay.
And then at the end of the second week, towards the end of the cycle, you know, you have to go back to get another dose of this poison every, was it 3.5 weeks or thereabouts? So anyway, the third week is the only week where you've really got to bite through.
Okay.
Not that I never threw up. I never had any of those problems. So I was probably very lucky as well. So I went to the barn every day and rode, and it just said, put one foot in front of the other and you can do this.
Yeah.
And it turns out it wasn't all that bad. And I had, my family was incredibly supportive. And yeah, before I knew it, it was over.
Wow. And you know, that whole aspect of just continuing your day as if normal, right? Trying to do your
Yes.
best to keep things normal. And like you said, putting all of that was sort of around you out of your mind. That's amazing. That
Yes.
takes a lot of mental fortitude and discipline.
Yes, but you learn that when you're in dance class, don't you? Your arms go sideways, not at that angle, at this angle, and you practice it, and you practice it, and you practice it. And it's getting tiring now, but you practice it.
Yeah.
And tomorrow you're going to do it again. So I guess it was, you're coming back to what you asked me right at the beginning. I guess all of my life has been helpful in making me able to do that.
What do you do for yourself for self-care, whether it was during the time of your cancer treatment or even now? What do you do for yourself to make sure that you are mentally, physically, emotionally joyous and free of tension?
I do my best. I'm no superhero. There are days when I've got my tensions coming on. I know certain things can trigger it or not. Again, I try to take deep breaths, and in the morning I have my routine like that is good for me, and I try not to deviate from that. I do gymnastic in the morning for myself. It's not a system that, it's a little bit what my mother taught me. It's a little bit what I picked up here and there from experts like yourself. Through the equestrian team down in Florida one year, they had a wonderful lady come in that helped us with stretching and so on, because all riders have trouble with tight backs and one side that is not symmetrical with the other side, that kind of thing. So I've put a little program together for me and I enjoy it. So that's why I do it. I put on the music I want and I lie down and do this in the morning. And that's the beginning. And then I think what's important is that your daily routine incorporates the things that are important to you. I love to play with the dogs a little bit. I love to relax. I love to read. There's got to be some beauty, harmony, and dinner is still important. Whoever is there, and even if nobody's there, I will cook. I don't throw things in the oven because I want to sit down and enjoy my food.
Nice.
So there you go again. That's a little bit just an probably learned, innate response, but it makes me feel good.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
That's what it's all about.
Exactly. and on that lighter note and feeling good in a sport that can be so serious, has there been a time where you found yourself in a situation where all you could do was laugh?
Laugh or cry.
You tell me.
I've done both.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've done both. But again, it's like a spring shower. It's over very quickly, you know, and then you come back. But I can remember competitions where I came out and I said, oh, this was the worst. What am I going to do? And then I'd spend the night up thinking what had happened, why this hadn't happened. And sometimes that resulted in good ideas to try. And sometimes it didn't. But another thing, I do spend a lot of time thinking about different ways to go about a problem with a horse or a rider or a situation that they're in. And I can spend a few days thinking about that and saying, well, maybe we should try this, maybe we should try that. And but that's normal, but you have to watch that doesn't get overboard.
Right.
You know?
Right. Okay.
Right.
You've had a lifetime effect on development of dressage in Canada, from co-founding Cadora to coaching Olympians and PanAm athletes. What are your thoughts on Equestrian Canada's approach to developing quality coaches across all disciplines? Number
one, I think I know why and where they're going now, and it's a humongous task. It's a huge task. And every other country has some kind of regulatory factor. It's got to happen because we are funded by Sport Canada. Sport Canada looks after the skiers and the swimmers and everybody else. And all these federations have things in common. The setup, the safe sport stuff, the police checks, and so on. So what behooves equestrians to say, well, I don't want to do that because we never have. Well, that's not really going to help the situation. If the sport is going to be a national sport and is going to get funding, we're going to have to do some of those things. I know it takes time. I know it's tiresome, particularly the first time around, right? When you don't know your way through. And I think it was extraordinarily difficult for EC to even get as far as they are now, because it was like there were things missing the first few times. This would happen and something else would happen, and they were not prepared for that. I'll give you a little example. If we're getting the coaching program up and running in Canada, and one of the requirements is that everybody across the board then is registered or is listed, right?
Yeah.
So what happens out in, let's say, in Vancouver at Thunderbird when American riders come up to show in Canada, and suddenly their American coach shows up, which has always happened. But at this point, there may not be a reciprocal agreement still. So the American coach doesn't have to be licensed.
Okay.
But he's coming up to look after his clients. He's not going to take kindly to being told he can't coach at the show. Maybe he will understand, maybe he won't. And that's kind of a silly example, but it's what could happen. It's just the kind of thing that hasn't been worked out because there hasn't been sufficient time and nobody could think of all the things that could happen.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So step one is to get everybody registered that wants to, and I think they've looked after some good ways to help people. As long as you're registered and in the program and trying to further yourself, you are working towards your certification. That's pretty neat that you can do the two things at once, right?
Yeah.
And then there's all the courses being offered. And for somebody who is a professional and wants to make their money, it certainly isn't going to hurt them to go through that setup. Like I say, some of it is totally irrelevant to riding. And what I've tried in my input to them is to say, look, if you want yearly training plans and stuff, don't just talk about the athlete, because all these sports are coming from a single athlete. Make that yearly training plan for two athletes, for the horse and the rider.
Nice. Yeah.
And that way integrate so that an equestrian can kind of look at the stuff and say, oh, okay, I see some correlation here, because there's a lot of the programs that don't have a word in them about anything to do with a horse. So, I mean, you get somebody who is maybe a great horse person, but hasn't had that background in computers and those kind of programs and things. And they're going to say, oh my God, this is not for me.
Yeah, I mean, no one likes change. So this,
Yeah.
this is a bit of a challenge for some, I'm sure.
Oh, it's radical.
Yeah.
It's radical. I still, I'm a perfect example because I'm at an age where I don't necessarily, I didn't grow up with internet and all that stuff, but I have to work my way around it. But I know to ask people for help if I need it.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have to do it.
Yep. Yeah, it's progress, and if it's going to raise the standards in our country for our equestrian sports, I think that's a good overall thing to do.
Right, and we can't expect that it's going to be perfect.
No.
Right off the bat, it's not. It's a growing process.
Absolutely. Okay, so Christilot, this is my last question. And I've just loved having you here. This has been so much fun. I've been looking forward to this. So last question, does Christilot Boylen have any goals left to accomplish?
Oh yes, all kinds of them.
Can you share some of them?
Well, I don't want to share names, but I am terribly excited for various riders and horses that I'm currently working with.
Okay.
And all at different levels. That's the interesting part. And so I'm very much committed to going forward and watching their progress over the next few years, as well as all the young horses, not only young ones, whatever degree they're at, developing those horses, and then eventually being able to say, gee, I have the perfect rider for this horse, or this horse would be the perfect match for this one. That would be my dream, to somehow get more riders and horses matched up in a direction that could be more successful, because that's one of the biggest problems I think facing any country, but very much so Canada, is there are often extremely good horses matched with riders not up to the standard of the horse, and vice versa. I know some very good riders that are on horses that are not going to make it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, isn't that the reality? So having someone like you that has that vast ability to recognize different elements in different horses and knowing people so well as to bring them together, that's a pretty powerful.
It's nice, but you have to be careful again, because it's not my territory to take horses away from one person and give them to another.
Right.
And owners have a right to say, I don't care if I can't do the perfect job. I enjoy riding this horse. But then they got to be happy with what they get in the way of results, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have the pocketbook to say, here's the horse. I could buy it and give it to so-and-so. And I don't think that's exactly what anyone expects me to be able to do. But if more people had what they thought were quality horses and were ready to try and combine it in the right direction, whether I would certainly want to say, look, if this is a jumper, call these 3 people. Or if this is going to be a dressage horse, look at these people in the ring and decide yourself with me where this horse should go.
Okay.
And give it a whirl. That's no, the thing is, there's no 100% rate of success in these things.
Mm-hmm.
You know horses as well as I do. Tomorrow they've got this, and the next day the rider has had a nervous breakdown, and the next day something else has happened. So getting everything together, one of the big deals in being a top rider is somehow keeping everything glued together long enough to get it into the ring.
That's a real art, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much, Christilot, for taking time and taking part in this podcast with me. It's been amazing. Your experience and sharing your stories. I'm sure so many listeners will enjoy this podcast and learn a lot. So thank you so much.
I hope I've amused them at least a little bit. And again, it's not all terribly serious. It's a wonderful thing. Isn't it wonderful? The bottom line for me is I've been able to make my living and live my life doing exactly what I wanted to do every day, which is,
that's
terrific.
Special. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, thank
you so much for having me. And well, I'll see you soon anyway, probably.
Yes, you will.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
So there you have it. I have some great interviews lined up for future episodes, and we'll be covering some pretty interesting topics, as always with the intent to open and engage the horse world on a wide variety of issues. So until next time, keep your eyes forward and continue to hit your stride. To stay current with Hitting Your Stride, subscribe on my website or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. If you like what you've heard here today, make sure you share and leave a comment to help guide future episodes and widen the audience. And be sure to check out social media to keep up to date with Equestrian Elements Life Coaching.